Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Playing to Win Practitioners Insight. I think this is our 9th show. Welcome, Roger. Super excited.
It's great to be back doing it. I think it is number 9.
It is number 9. And look, we're here to talk about all things strategy. We're all here to talk about all things competitive advantage, and really helping organizations as well as individuals play to win. I mean, what a great title to a book.
I'm glad you like it.
So this one is going to be about the popular view of competitive advantage. And it is a blog, I should say a Medium post that Roger did some time ago. And what I loved about it and why I wanted to sort of bring it up for this show this week is he talks about a popularized view that Warren Buffett had all the way back in 1995 about building a moat around your business and that whole concept. Funny enough, in Growth IQ, I talk about Amazon building a beachhead, which is sort of another way of saying a moat. But what I loved about Roger's position is he's not a fan of it. And which is why I love having these conversations, whether we're on this show or not, I always learn a ton. But let's start with Buffett's sort of moat concept, and then let's walk our way towards why you're not absolutely a fan of it.
Yeah, though I am absolutely a fan of Warren Buffett, and there's a whole lot of truth to that, which is a great insight on his part, and I think it's guided his investing, which is without competitive advantage, life is miserable, right? And so he does not want to invest in companies where he can't see a strong competitive advantage. And he uses the metaphor of a moat, and I love metaphors, and so that's good. The only thing I don't like about that metaphor is it's fairly stagnant. Like it's sort of what it calls to mind is there's a castle, and probably one that's been there for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, and there's a moat around it, and it's always been there, and it's always been this deep or the like. So it is too static for me in my practice of strategy. I just see these things as moving. There's a real movement to it, and I thought a lot about how to kind of think about what would be a better metaphor for people so that they could really glom onto to what it means, and so it is a jumping off point, and I'll give Warren Buffett credit, and by the way, I'm a huge fan of his because he was so nice to me. He liked what I was doing. As you know, I was the dean of a business school for a while. He liked so much what I was doing at the school. He just calls up and says, "Would you like to come down to Wichita and talk? I like what you're doing," because we were one of the only schools that had a value investing class. Even though value investing is really important, started at Columbia, Ben Graham, hardly any schools had it. So, and then he couldn't have been more gracious to me. So I love the man, so I used that as a jumping off point to say what could be a better metaphor that has more of a sense of movement and evolution to it. So that was the motivation of the post.
And I think why, and I'm just going to use your words here, is the moat is permanent, right? That's one, right? The second is it promotes this idea of competitive advantage as static and unchanging,
right?
And I would agree. And I think if you take it literally, I would agree, right? It's very static, it's unchanging. But that sort of, I want something between me and my competitors and I, that metaphor.
Good.
That's good.
Yeah. That's really good, because if you don't have anything on them, it's just a miserable life, and it isn't good for anybody. I mean, people often say, "Roger, why are you so much into competitive advantage? Isn't that sort of mean? You want to be beating up on other people?" No, I want you to encourage other competitors to do other things, to serve other customers or the same customers in different ways, so that some customers say, "Oh, I love you, Tiffany. I love your product," and other customers say, "Roger, your product is awesome." Then we can both have a great life, and those two sets of customers are served better because Tiffany and Company offer something different than Martin and Company. So I love the idea of competitive advantage, not to beat up on people, but to create this separation so customers aren't stuck saying everybody's doing the same thing.
Right.
And then when customers are stuck with that, it's almost as though they get their final revenge. They say, "Well, Tiffany, what are you offering?" And you say, $2.57. Roger, what are you? Oh, how about 248, 212? It's just a horrible race to the bottom when we're doing the same thing. So I want to have a sense of competitive advantage, as Buffett did, and as you were saying. But how do you see it as something that evolves? And in fact, if you sit there in your castle surrounded by your moat, I mean, my view is somebody, if that castle is really valuable, somebody is going to find a way to build a bridge over that moat, and then you're toast because you haven't been thinking about how to evolve my advantage. If
And
instead,
this is
right, you're building the moat bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger with the edge okay, but that doesn't happen with moats, and so the metaphor kind of breaks down, I think.
Well, but you're not, to clarify, right? You're not saying that competitive advantage should be dynamic. You're actually saying that it is dynamic, right?
Yes.
Like it has to be, it is, it's not that it should be. You can't just go, look, I want to be dynamic. It has to be dynamic.
Yeah.
And that gets us to another metaphor that you landed on, which I think is helpful. But also, you're going to stretch the limit. So if you're listening to this, you're like, I like the moat one, like whatever metaphor works for you, I'm a fan of. I'm also a huge fan of metaphors, right? Because I think I'm a visual learner more than a read learner and a listen learner. And so I can immediately visualize the castle, the moat, the drawbridge. Like I get it right away. And I want to keep people out. And maybe I can't build a bigger moat over time, but that moat gets fortified, right? I'm always looking to maybe I make it deeper, not wider, right? Because it gets more difficult. But you moved to another metaphor, which I want to sort of dig into, that I'm going to visualize, because again, I'm a visual learner. So maybe you can walk us through the metaphor of rooms.
Sure. So there you got the graphic, yes, which took a long time for the graphic artist who does my stuff to sort of to glom onto. But I imagine that you as a company are in a long hallway, if you will, right? And in front of you is a curtain, right? And behind you is a curtain. You're in that room and you compete in that room. So you have knowledge about what's in that room and can use that knowledge to create the best position you can create. But competitive advantage comes from, if you're in that room, getting the knowledge from competing in that room, and your competitor isn't. And by the time the competitor maybe opens the curtains behind you to start peeking into the room, you've actually, because of what you've learned in that room, moved to the next room, right? And in the next room, because you're competing the way you are in that room, you're privy to knowledge about the customers, about how to create the product, what features to offer with it, that the other person isn't even thinking about yet because they're not in that room. And so competitive advantage is about questions. It's about the questions that you're able to ask because you're there in that room. And that way, if you keep on asking questions they haven't even figured out they ought to ask, right? Then you get to be ahead kind of forever. It's not a static mode, but you're, if you will, if you want that metaphor, you're always one step ahead of the competition.
but you can't get to the next room without having gone through this one. It's like
Yes.
right? So
There's
like
no shortcut.
there's
Yeah.
no short. You can't go, well, I'm in room. Let's just say in this visual, there's 7 rooms, right? It's infinite, but let's just say there's
Yes.
7, right? So you're in one. Can you jump to 5, or it's right? You're going 1, and then whatever you're learning in 1, and you have that competitive advantage in 1. You're now moving to 2 as the competitors are catching up to you in room 1. So now
Yeah.
you've moved on to 2, and so on and so on, right? You're just constantly trying to. I always say, not everyone can be Steve Jobs, or a Mark Benioff or someone like that, where they're years ahead from a competitive standpoint. But at a minimum, you want to really strive to welcoming your customers when they show up with what they want next, but they might not know they even want it now. And so you
Exactly.
don't have to be years out, right? But
Yep.
being ahead is really important.
Yeah, and for example, let's use your guy Steve Jobs, right? So he's running a computer company, and that computer um, is one as the internet really takes shape, where rendering websites is really important, because the computer, especially after 2000, has become more of an internet access device, and you're really good at rendering. So you have asked questions of yourself about, well, how do you do that? Because it's not as easy as people may think. They may say, hey, there's just a website out there and it shows up on your screen. Well, it's a little more complicated than that. You're really good at that. And because you're asking all sorts of questions about that the competitors in computers, who are thinking of more as a calculating device rather than an internet access device, they're not asking those questions. You ask those questions. And so when you enter the smartphone business, you've been asking questions that make it super valuable in that next room, where you say the iPhone was dramatically superior to any other smartphone at the time of its launch on rendering websites. So the images look better, they are more real, they didn't glitch as often or freeze as often. And then you had, right, the internet access device. You were actually competing against BlackBerry, which was the email device. You had the internet access device, but then you learned all sorts of things about how to do that enabled you to go to the next generation of questions sooner than anybody else, because they weren't asking those questions as, hey, how do we take our incredible web rendering knowledge and take it from a screen this big to a screen this big and make it look great. So by asking yourself those questions, you enable yourself to go through to start figuring out the next set of questions when the guys behind you aren't even asking those questions yet, because they don't know their questions, because they aren't participating in the activity in that room. You have to participate in the activities in that room. And people often, they're obsessed these days about, the big competitive advantage in the modern world is data, having more data. I'm not so nuts about that either. I think it's you have access to more questions. That's what gives you the advantage, because that with questions come hypotheses about what we might be able to do that we can't do right now. And for me, that's the source of advantage. And I talk about pods, right? Tide pods in the post, as you know. And that was just sort of a crushing blow to P&G's competitors, because they weren't even asking questions about well, what form factor might people doing wash, especially women doing wash, because that's the biggest percentage of customers are women doing wash. What form factor would be better. Everybody is asking questions about how can I make my liquid detergent clean better? How can I be like Procter and manage to put bleach into it in a really user-friendly way and fabric softener into it? And they're asking those questions. P&G had already been asking all those questions, answering all those questions, which when they got to the answers of the question, they said, hey, there's another set of questions we could be asking, which is form factor. What if we could like put that all in one little thing and you could just flip it in rather than having to pour it in and spill and not know how much you should and how to dose it, the cleaner versus the fabric softener versus the bleach, blah, 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 blah. So it was kind of devastating to competitors because they weren't asking those questions. P&G had asked those questions already, got answers, got to the next room, and by then delivering that form factor and being able to ask intelligent questions about, well, how are they using that? What could we do next? That's advantage. And that kind of advantage, by the time your competitors are asking the questions you were asking 5 years ago, you're asking another set of questions. You're in another room asking another set of questions. They can't catch up. They should be able to, like in theory, it's like we're both in the same business. We're washing clothes. We'll do R&D and you'll do R&D, and we should be able to catch up. Nope.
Well, that story also, Martin Lindstrom, who wrote the book Small Data, a lot of this was he like went into homes and was looking at how are they using laundry detergent. And so Small Data was looking at these small signals and actually watching people in the wild using your product, right? Not in a controlled room, but really using it. It was usually a woman might have a small child on her hip and trying to open the container and pour the container out, and it was leaking everywhere. And that was the start of that spout, so that it would actually stop that. That was kind of the first set of questions that led them to the next room. So from the spout, right, and the weight of it, and then it was, okay, what's the next? If the weight is solved and the spout is no longer dripping down the side of the bottle, and right, then it was, okay, how do we make this easier? And then like lighter, if I am holding a child or I'm trying to multitask, I can't pick up this big thing, or I just can't pick up that big thing. I might have a hand issue, or I'm older, or whatever it might be, then the pod, right? So it was going back to your room. The first room was, it is what it is. It's powder.
Yes.
We're really going to date ourselves. And then it became, okay, well, powder's not great. Okay. It's not great. Okay. We're going to go to liquid. Oh, that was revolutionary. And then it was, it's dripping everywhere. Well, it's heavy. Okay. Then it was, now it's going to fix the spout. And then I'm on to the next room. So I've just been going to the next, now I'm all the way to the pods.
Yes.
So now I'm 3 rooms in and my competition's going, whoa, we just added the spout. Like we've just solved this. They're already to pods.
Yeah.
And so that is a competitive advantage for a period of time, But you also may open, like, look at how many, iPhone replicas there were, or when someone, the greatest form of flattery is just to copy what you do. And the competition has copied those pods in some way without going against, IP, right? Or anything that's patented. But that was a iteration of, I started with, it was powder all the way to it's a pod. And then people found like weaknesses in the pod. And so you always constantly, that's why that dynamic, right?
Yes.
It's dangerous for kids. The color is inviting for children, and so you constantly have to be looking for ways to make sure, while being competitive, you don't get too far in advance, but then also responding to the fact your competition is going to quickly, they might not call it pods. They might have a circle or a ball. So they've got a ball and you've got a pod. Right?
No, absolutely, and that's the dynamic aspect of it that I like, and I think the Martin Lindstrom point that you bring up is a good one. Like you and I both like the guy a lot because he's smart, both smart and nice, and that's a nice combination. But he's a great questioner, right?
Yes.
And this is in part the practitioner insights, which is pay a lot of attention to the questions that you're asking. And ask yourself the question, are my competitors asking the same questions? Because if your competitors aren't stupid and they're asking the same questions, chances are they're going to come to similar solutions to you. Right. So what you want to be thinking about is am I putting myself in a position to ask different questions better questions, next generation questions that my competitors haven't yet figured out are questions, and that's kind of what you want to be doing, and at risk of talking about my family's arcane business. So our family's in the business of animal feed manufacturing, and it started up when I was 2. So my only memory is a teeny little company. Now it's a big, gigantic company run by my older brother. But it's mainly for farmers feeding chickens. The life of a chicken is not a very long life. It's a 14-week life. And the normal thing to do in that industry is to feed 2 weeks of what's called chick starter, then 10 weeks of grower, and 2 weeks of finisher. So there's 3 feeds across the 14 weeks. Okay. And my brother sort of starts asking a different set of questions. So the reason it's 2-10-2 is that's about as much complexity as the farmers want, because they've got these big bins. They put the feed in the bin, and the bins go to have feeding troughs to the chickens. Man, if it's got more complicated than that, that would drive them nuts. But Rick starts asking another question. He says, well, is it actually true that there are only 3 different feeds across those 14 weeks that are optimal? And he goes and does a bunch of research and comes to the conclusion, the science is pretty clear. Optimally, you'd feed a different feed every week. But the farmers, if you said that to them, they'd say, "Oh my God, that's too complicated. I'll
Right.
mix it up." Right. So he invents a concept called broiler care. Chickens for eating are called broilers. And all you do is sign up in the first week, ask no questions, essentially. And we are responsible for putting in the bins the feed.
All right. Yep.
Farmers have no idea actually what's in the bin. They don't actually know that it's different every week. All they know is, my goodness, their feed conversion, how many pounds of chicken they get for a pound of feed, has gone way up, and that's just pure money, right? And the competitors have no idea why our feed grows chickens better, faster. No idea. It just does. And in that industry, farmers have bake-offs. They'll have one company feed one barn and another company feed the other barn, and the loser has to pay the differential to the others. That's what the farmers do. And so we win 100% of the time, and they're all frustrated. But they didn't know what question to ask to solve that problem, right? Rick was asking a different set of questions because he had gotten into understanding the farmers, how they operated, how animals grew, and started asking a new set of questions. And then, right, he can perfect that to an ever greater extent. So he's working on how to perfect a 14 different week feeding program, while the other companies are trying to say, how can we pump up the starter, or is it the problem in the grower, or is it the finisher? They're asking it a different set of questions that leave them way behind. So that would be an example of asking different questions and being in a different room.
Yeah, and I'm a fan. I use the term a master asker, like really honing your skill of being really, really good at asking questions, and not just arbitrary questions, but questions now in this metaphor, right? To get you to the next room. What is the next room? What does it look like? What's my blind spots? What am I not seeing? What am I not hearing? And today there is absolutely no shortage of data, right? I mean, businesses today, the sort of the advantage of the modern business is there's no shortage of data. Sometimes that's not good because you have too much or it's not accurate. But, what are those little signals? Once again, in case I said it too fast, Martin Lindstrom's book, Small Data, he really walks through the power of that. It's a visual in his book and his analysis, not just going and looking at computer data. It is really sort of getting out in the wild and watching people. Something as simple as where they put magnets on their refrigerator.
Yes.
Something that simple, like, and what those magnets are of.
Yes.
Took him down a whole trail of going and recommending to a company that had no expectation that that's what he was going to find out. But so the questions weren't verbal. The questions were curiosity, and I go and I see it, right, and I start layering through. And so,
and can I just say, sorry to interrupt, but that would be a good example of if you don't have some insights and hypotheses, stuff that is data will just go whizzing by your ear. So if you didn't have a thought about fridge magnet placement, you wouldn't notice. Like if you ask somebody, under pain of death, where were their fridge magnets, they'd say, shoot me now, because they never paid attention to them. Whereas Martin, paid attention to them. The other thing I was just thinking of, Tiffany, and you probably know him well too, and he's like Martin, smart and nice, Hal Gregerson.
Yeah.
He's written a book about the importance of questions that he quoted me on and the like. But that's another resource. I have to say I'm not as good as you. I can't remember the title, but it was Hal Gregerson.
Yeah, and I brought up Master Asker to him when I had him on my podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, and where I got that from was the book Ask. There's a book Ask by the author who did Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Okay. Interesting.
It'll come to me in a second. It'll come to me in a second. But anyway, we were having this conversation about asking better questions, right? And really getting good at it. And Master Asker is kind of where we landed. Anyway, so we've digressed into multiple people who, but I would say that this is, not the why, not 3 whys. Like that's not what we mean here, right? It's really being thoughtful, curious, trying to uncover, because the answer to those questions may save you time because you say, I don't want to do it, which, making a no decision is equally as good when it comes to strategy and planning as making a yes decision. And so, I think there's a lot to be said there. So
and again, the key, if I can just say the key that would make you a master asker, to your point, would be, are they different questions? Like, and it's kind of really important. And this is where I'm not a fan of like benchmarking often and going to all the industry conferences and listening to all the so-called experts from an industry on it, because that will drive your mind to asking similar questions as all of your competitors. And that's a trap. Because if you spend your time asking the same questions, you'll come up with similar, if not identical, answers, and that'll drive you together. And back to the moat point, the fact that we do believe, you and I believe, as with Warren Buffett, that you got to have a competitive advantage. That competitive advantage, I believe, will come more likely from asking a different set of questions that will cause you to do something different than your competitor. It'll make something that you do be sensible to you and you alone. Like what's the best thing that can happen to you is your competitor think you're nuts. Like you're nuts. You're just, what the hell are you doing? Jack Bogle, nobody wants an index fund. Nobody wants an index fund. Well, $7 trillion of index funds later, I guess they sort of did. But the reaction to him was, I don't, like, why are you doing this thing? Well, it's because he was asking different questions. The others were asking, all the managed fund companies were asking, how can we get our managers to be better, and how can we have more kinds of funds, growth funds and this funds, and Jack Bogle was asking, it was in his dissertation at Princeton, was asking the question, why do we think that managers can beat the market? Why?
Who knows? But so Hal's book is Questions Are the Answer. That's the
Yes,
book.
yes. Thank you.
That's the book. So, and then Mark
Mark.
Victor Hansen was Chicken Soup for the Soul, but his
Oh,
book is Ask. So
okay. Well, there you
I
go.
had to let the cobwebs. It's
Good for
comes with
you.
age. Comes with
You're
age. And I
better
cheated
than
and
me.
looked online. And I cheated and looked online. But
Uh,
anyway, Roger, this is a wrap for show 9. Thank you,
Perfect.
everybody, for joining us on this one. The popular view of competitive advantage. Hopefully, the metaphor helped you. The rooms, getting from one to the next, asking better questions, why it's important, and how building a greater moat or being ahead on the room changing, and also staying as dynamic and flexible and fluid as you possibly can, I think are great pieces of advice. So with that, Roger, any parting words?
Nope, that you summarized it wonderfully, and I look forward to number 10.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.